My name is Brianna Howard. I'm 34. And I never thought I'd be the one standing in my parents' living room on Christmas morning watching the entire family freeze as I asked the question that changed everything. At the joyful Christmas party, my father quietly sold my house to cover the debts of the sister they always called irresponsible. When I walked into the living room, everyone stood by the Christmas tree, the silence suffocating. "Who did you sell the house to?" I asked calmly. I let out a soft laugh. "What's so funny?" they shouted. I said, "Because the house you just sold actually belongs to." I could see the color drain from their faces. My father's hand tightened on his glass. My mother's smile vanished. Courtney looked like she wanted to disappear. And in that one frozen moment, everything I had quietly carried for 5 years, the payments, the guilt, the invisible role of being their safety net came crashing into the open. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just stood there watching the truth hit them harder than any argument ever could, because what they thought was a simple transaction was never theirs to sell. If you've ever wondered what happens when the person who always says yes finally says enough, stick around. This story isn't about revenge. It's about what happens when you stop funding someone else's life at the expense of your own. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because the full truth and the consequences is coming up next. You won't want to miss how it all ends. Everything started when my business truly took off 5 years ago. I had spent countless nights in a small apartment in Raleigh, coding the first version of my subscription box platform, curated wellness products delivered monthly to busy women who wanted convenience without compromise. What began as a side project quickly grew into a six-figure business, and then seven, thanks to smart marketing, loyal customers, and relentless work. By year 2, revenue was steady enough that I could finally move out of that cramped space and into a modern 3-bedroom house on the outskirts of the city, a place I bought outright with my own savings and a manageable mortgage that I paid off faster than expected. The deed was in my name alone, 100%, and that felt like the ultimate proof I had built something solid from nothing. Around the same time, my family started facing some financial pressure. My parents' mortgage payments had crept up with rising interest rates, and my younger sister had accumulated a mix of student loan debt and credit card balances from lifestyle choices that outpaced her income. The first time I stepped in, it was meant to be temporary, just a few months to help them catch their breath. I covered the mortgage payment for the house they had lived in since I was a teenager, wired money to clear some overdue balances, and even booked a family vacation to the Outer Banks as a way to celebrate together. They were genuinely grateful at first. Calls came in with thanks, texts with heart emojis, promises that it was just until things stabilize. I kept everything under my control, transfers from my personal account, no shared access, no joint cards, because I wanted to make sure it stayed manageable. As the months turned into a year, those one-time helps became routine. The mortgage payment continued, credit card minimums were covered, and the vacations grew more frequent, a cruise here, a weekend in Asheville there. They started referring to me as the family's safety net in casual conversation, and while I still felt good about helping, something subtle shifted. The gratitude faded into expectation. Conversations moved from "thank you so much" to "can you handle this one too," without the same warmth. I noticed the tone change in group texts, the way requests arrived with less context and more assumption that I would simply make it happen. Still, I kept going. I told myself it was what family does, that my success meant I had the ability to lift everyone up. I never asked for repayment, never set strict deadlines, and always made sure the transfers went through smoothly so no one felt embarrassed. Looking back, that was the quiet beginning of the pattern. I gave without strings, they received without question, and slowly the line between support and obligation blurred until it was barely visible. When business stabilized and income flowed steadily, the way my family saw me shifted gradually over time. What had once been occasional help became something they expected as a matter of course. Thank you messages grew shorter until they disappeared entirely, replaced by casual requests that arrived without preamble. The nickname "the wallet" started appearing regularly in group chats, used with a light tone that made it sound like an inside joke, but it carried an edge I could no longer ignore. Whenever I hesitated on a request, the response was almost always the same: "You're rich, you won't feel it." Those words came up so often that they began to echo in my head, even when no one said them out loud. Mom would call on quiet evenings, her voice soft, but insistent. "Brianna, your father and I were thinking about a little getaway. Nothing fancy, just a long weekend. You've got so much going on with the business, but you won't even notice the difference, right?" Dad would chime in during Sunday dinners, chuckling as he passed the potatoes. The wallet of the family comes through again. They said it with affection, but the affection felt thinner each time, more like habit than gratitude. My younger sister Courtney was the boldest. She texted screenshots of designer bags or weekend plans with a simple caption: "This would be perfect. Hook me up. No, please, no explanation, just the assumption that I would handle it." The requests piled up in ways that felt both small and enormous at once. A new phone for Courtney because hers was acting up. Extra mortgage cushion for my parents just in case. Plane tickets for a cousin's wedding they decided to attend last minute. Each one seemed reasonable on its own, but together they formed a pattern I couldn't unsee. They stopped asking how the business was doing or whether I was getting any rest. Conversations turned almost exclusively to what they needed next, and when I tried to steer things back to my life, the topic quickly circled back to money. I started feeling the weight more acutely. Nights that used to end with satisfaction now ended with a quiet dread as I checked my accounts and saw how much had gone out. I told myself it was temporary, that they were just adjusting to my success, that family meant giving without keeping score. But the exhaustion built slowly, like a debt I couldn't pay down. I would lie awake calculating not just dollars but emotional energy, wondering how long I could keep pouring from a cup that was starting to run dry. Still, I kept going, convincing myself that stepping back would make me the selfish one, that my role was to keep the peace, even if it meant carrying more than my share. The shift wasn't dramatic at first. It crept in through little comments and assumptions that grew louder over months. Mom began mentioning her spa days as if they were already approved. Dad would forward property listings for a better place, with a note saying, "You could make this happen." Courtney's texts became more frequent, sometimes multiple in a day, always ending with the same casual demand. They no longer asked about my schedule or my stress levels. The focus stayed on what I could provide. I noticed how they planned events around the idea that funding was guaranteed, booking things before even checking with me. When I finally pointed out how much I was handling, the response was dismissive. "That's what family is for. You're doing great. So we all benefit." The emotional toll deepened. I found myself hesitating before opening messages, bracing for another request. Workdays stretched longer because I needed to generate more to cover everything, and downtime disappeared into calculations of what came next. I began to question whether my success had become a burden rather than a blessing. Every time I considered pulling back, guilt rushed in, memories of childhood support, promises to always be there for each other. So I pushed through, telling myself the imbalance was temporary, that eventually they would see the effort and appreciate it. But the appreciation never returned, and the entitlement only grew stronger, turning what started as help into an unspoken obligation I could no longer escape. Gradually, I realized I could not continue like this forever, and then the moment finally arrived. It came on a Thursday evening in late fall, when my father called, his tone casual at first, as he explained that Courtney had run into serious trouble with her credit card debt, around $50,000, that had ballooned from missed payments and high interest charges. He said the creditors were threatening legal action and that the family needed to step in before things got worse. "This is the last big one," he assured me. Then everything will be stable again. I listened quietly while the words sank in the same promise I had heard before, but now carrying a heavier weight. I took a deep breath and told him no. For the first time, I said the word clearly and without apology. I explained that I had to prioritize my own financial stability and the business, which was entering a critical expansion phase with new inventory costs and marketing commitments. I pointed out that I had already covered far more than anyone had anticipated, and continuing at this rate would put everything I had built at risk. The line went silent for a long moment before he spoke again, his voice low and measured. "I didn't expect this from you, Brianna." The reaction escalated quickly after that. Mom called within the hour, her voice trembling as she started crying almost immediately. She reminded me of all the sacrifices they had made when I was growing up, how they had supported my dreams even when money was tight, and now when they needed help the most, I was turning my back. "You're being selfish," she said between sobs. "The family is falling apart because you won't help your sister. Is that what you want, to watch us lose everything?" Her words cut deep, stirring up guilt that I had tried to push aside for months. Dad followed with a text message later that night. "You've changed, Brianna. We thought you understood what family means." No anger, just quiet disappointment that felt even heavier. They kept the pressure on over the next few days. Mom sent voice notes filled with tears recounting stories from my childhood to remind me of the bond we were supposedly breaking. Dad forwarded emails from collection agencies to show the urgency, adding comments like, "This could ruin her credit forever if we don't act." Courtney herself texted a long message about how embarrassed she felt and how she had always looked up to me, implying that my refusal was a personal betrayal. The manipulation was relentless, designed to make me question my decision and feel responsible for their pain. They framed my boundary as an attack on the family, not as self-protection. I felt the emotional pull intensely. Every message triggered a wave of doubt. Had I become cold? Was I really putting money over people? I spent hours replaying conversations, weighing their words against the reality of my bank statements and the stress that had started affecting my sleep and focus at work. But beneath the guilt, a small part of me recognized the pattern. They were not asking for help anymore. They were demanding it, and when denied, they turned to emotional tactics to regain control. The conversations never included questions about my own strain or offers to find other solutions. It was always about what I owed them. In the end, I held firm, though the internal conflict left me drained. I stopped responding immediately to every message, giving myself space to breathe. The silence from their side grew longer, replaced by occasional passive comments in group chats about how hard things are right now. The guilt lingered, but so did a quiet clarity. Saying no had been necessary, even if it hurt everyone involved, including me. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel the possibility that protecting my future did not make me a bad daughter or sister. It made me someone who finally understood her own worth. Then, one afternoon, when everything seemed to have settled back into a tense routine, my phone buzzed with a call from my Aunt Sophia Ross. Her voice was hushed and unsteady as she asked if I was alone. When I confirmed, she took a deep breath and explained what she had overheard the previous weekend during a family gathering at my parents' house. She had stepped into the kitchen for water and caught my father on the phone with a real estate broker named Logan Pierce. Dad's words were clear and deliberate. "Once this goes through, she won't even know until it's done." Aunt Sophia said he sounded confident, almost relieved, as if the plan was already in motion. She stayed quiet, pretending not to hear, but the conversation continued long enough for her to piece together that he was discussing the sale of my house, the one I had bought 6 years earlier and paid off completely on my own. I felt the room tilt slightly as she spoke. Aunt Sophia continued, her tone growing more urgent. She had seen paperwork on the dining table when she returned later, documents that referenced a power of attorney, but the signature looked off too shaky for my father's usual steady hand. She suspected forgery. Dad had apparently used that fake power of attorney to authorize the transfer, and the deed had already been filed with the Register of Deeds in Wake County. The transaction was recorded, meaning on paper, it looked legitimate, even though it was built on fraud. The buyer, a couple named Aaron Mercer and Bradley Mercer, had no idea, and the broker Logan Pierce was facilitating the entire process. I thanked her quietly, my mind racing, and ended the call. The first thing I did was open my laptop and pull up the Wake County Public Records portal. Searching by my address took less than 2 minutes. There it was, the recorded deed transfer dated 3 weeks earlier, with my name listed as grantor through a power of attorney signed in my father's presence. The signature was a clumsy imitation of mine, nothing like the one on my actual documents. The buyers' names appeared clearly: Aaron and Bradley Mercer, a married couple from Durham who had closed quickly. The sale price was listed at $480,000, close to market value, but none of that money had reached me. My hands shook as I saved screenshots of every page. I needed professional advice immediately, so I dialed Dana Brooks, my close friend and the attorney who had handled my business contracts for years. Dana answered on the second ring, and when I explained what I had found, she switched to full professional mode without hesitation. She asked me to email the screenshots right away and promised to pull the full title history. Within an hour, she called back with confirmation the power of attorney was fraudulent, no valid notarization, no witness signatures matching any record of mine, and the deed itself carried a cloud that could be challenged. The title remained legally mine because fraud voids the transfer from the start under North Carolina law. A quiet title action would clear it, and I could file a liis pendens to freeze any further dealings. Dana also explained the risks for my father. Forging a power of attorney and recording a false deed constituted fraud, potentially a felony depending on the value involved. The broker Logan Pierce could face disciplinary action from the North Carolina Real Estate Commission if he knew or should have known the documents were questionable. The buyers, Aaron and Bradley, were innocent third parties and would be protected by title insurance. They would likely get reimbursed without losing the property if the deal collapsed, but the process would be messy and public. My father had exposed himself to civil liability from the buyer's insurer and possible criminal charges if I pursued a report with the district attorney. I sat in silence after the call, staring at the screen where my name still appeared as the sole owner. The betrayal hit harder than any financial loss could have. This was not a request for help. This was an attempt to take something I had earned without my knowledge or consent. My father had not asked, had not explained, had simply proceeded as if my property belonged to the family by default. The words Aunt Sophia repeated, "She won't even know until it's done," played on a loop in my mind. He had planned for me to discover it only after the money was gone and the title transferred. The anger came slowly, mixed with a strange clarity. I realized the pattern had been building for years, but this crossed a line I had never imagined anyone in my family would cross. I spent the rest of the afternoon organizing the documents, backing up everything, and outlining next steps with Dana. She advised me to stay quiet for now, gather more evidence, and avoid confrontation until I was ready to protect my rights fully. The discovery changed everything, not just the relationship with my family, but the way I viewed my own boundaries. For the first time, I understood that trust once broken this way could not be repaired with apologies or promises. It required action, and I was finally prepared to take it. After the discovery, I did not confront anyone right away. Dana advised against it to avoid complicating the situation further. Instead, I started making quiet changes that would speak louder than any argument. The first step was simple but decisive. I logged into every bank and credit account linked to my family and removed all auto payments. The mortgage for my parents' house, which I had covered for years, was turned off with one click. The credit cards they used for everyday expenses and emergencies, cards I had co-signed or paid off repeatedly, were set to stop receiving funds from my side. Courtney's student loan payments and additional credit balances, the ones that had grown into that $50,000 burden, no longer received automatic transfers. I did not notify them. I did not explain. I simply let the accounts run dry on their own schedule. The overdue notices began arriving within weeks. First came polite emails from the mortgage lender reminding my parents that the payment was late. Then more urgent letters followed, warning of potential late fees and credit impact. Credit card companies sent alerts about minimum due amounts that were now entirely their responsibility. Collection calls started, though my family did their best to keep that part hidden from me. I knew because Dana had set up monitoring on the public records and credit reports tied to their names. The pressure built steadily, yet they maintained appearances. Group chats stayed light, filled with holiday plans and casual updates as if nothing had changed. They organized the Christmas party anyway. Mom insisted on keeping the tradition alive, decorating the house with the same lights and ornaments we had used since I was a child. Dad mentioned the guest list in passing during a brief call listing neighbors and distant relatives who always attended. Courtney posted photos of the tree on social media, captioning them with festive cheer. None of them acknowledged the mounting bills or asked why the usual transfers had stopped. They simply carried on, perhaps hoping the problem would resolve itself, or that I would step in at the last minute like always. The silence from their side felt deliberate, a way to avoid admitting the shift in power. I watched from a distance, keeping my responses short and neutral. When Mom texted about the party details, I replied that I would try to attend. When Dad forwarded a photo of the decorated mantel, I sent a thumbs-up emoji. Courtney asked if I could bring wine, and I said I would see. Each interaction was minimal, careful, designed to reveal nothing about the actions I had already taken. Dana reminded me that this was the right approach. Letting the consequences unfold naturally would make the eventual conversation more impactful. Rushing in with accusations would only give them time to prepare defenses or shift blame. The emotional weight of those weeks was heavy in a different way. I no longer felt the constant pull of guilt that had defined the previous years. In its place came a steady resolve mixed with moments of sadness for what the relationship had become. I spent evenings alone in my house reviewing the evidence again, organizing files for Dana, and planning the steps I would take after the holidays. The quiet was not peaceful yet, but it was mine. For the first time in a long while, my decisions were based on what I needed rather than what they expected. As Christmas approached, the overdue notices grew more serious. Mortgage statements showed delinquency, credit scores began dropping in public reports, and collection agencies left voicemails that went unanswered. My family kept up the facade, sending holiday cards and talking about how excited they were for the gathering. They never mentioned the financial strain directly to me, perhaps believing I would still rescue them, or that the issue would somehow disappear. I let them believe whatever they needed to believe. The truth would surface soon enough, and when it did, I would be ready to face whatever came next. A few days before Christmas, the atmosphere at my parents' house grew heavier than ever. The party had been scaled back this year, limited to close relatives and a handful of longtime neighbors who had become part of the annual tradition. Mom still insisted on the full decorations, garlands draped over the mantel, the same artificial tree with ornaments collected over decades, and strings of white lights framing the windows, but the effort felt forced. The guest list was shorter, the menu simpler, and the invitations sent out later than usual. They were trying to keep everything normal, but the cracks showed in small ways. Fewer chairs set up in the living room, fewer bottles of wine chilling in the fridge, and a noticeable absence of the extravagant touches they had added in previous years when my contributions made everything effortless. The tension simmered beneath the surface. Mom sent me a text about the party schedule, her message polite but clipped, ending with a question about what time I would arrive. When I replied that I would be there around noon, she sent back a simple okay without the usual emojis or follow-up questions. Dad called once to confirm I was still coming, his voice steady but strained, mentioning how much everyone was looking forward to seeing me. Neither of them brought up the overdue bills or the collection notices piling up on their kitchen counter. They acted as if the financial strain did not exist, as if the house was still running on the same rhythm it always had. Courtney's messages were more direct. She texted a photo of the Christmas tree with the caption, "Can't wait for you to see it in person," followed by a separate note asking if I could bring the usual dessert tray from the bakery I always ordered. When I said I was not sure about the bakery this year, she responded with a series of eye-roll emojis and a quick, "Fine, whatever." The tone carried an undercurrent of resentment, as if my hesitation was already a betrayal. Later, she sent a longer message about how stressed she had been with work and finances, hinting that the holidays were hard enough without extra worries. It was the same subtle manipulation that had worked before, designed to make me feel responsible for her comfort. I kept my replies brief and neutral, never engaging with the hints or accusations. The silence on my end seemed to amplify their discomfort. Mom began forwarding old family photos in the group chat, pictures from past Christmases, where I stood smiling in the middle arms around everyone with captions like, "Remember how fun this was." The implication was clear: things used to be better when I handled everything. Dad added comments about how the family had always stuck together, his words carrying a quiet plea wrapped in nostalgia. They were testing the waters, probing to see if I would soften, if I would step in and restore the balance they had grown accustomed to. I spent those days preparing myself mentally. I reviewed the documents Dana had prepared, practiced what I would say when the moment came, and reminded myself why this confrontation was necessary. The guilt that had once dominated my thoughts had faded into a dull ache, replaced by a calm determination. I knew the party would be the setting for everything to surface, and I accepted that the outcome might end relationships I had cherished for decades. The thought brought sadness, but not regret. I had given everything I could, and now it was time to protect what remained of my own life. The house itself felt different when I drove by one evening to drop off a small gift ahead of time. The lights were on, but the windows looked dimmer, the usual holiday glow subdued. I parked across the street for a moment, watching shadows move behind the curtains, and felt a strange detachment. This place had been home once, filled with warmth and laughter, but now it represented something else entirely, a space where my generosity had been taken for granted until it was no longer convenient. I left the gift on the porch without ringing the bell and drove away, already mentally rehearsing the conversation that would take place in a few short days. Christmas morning, I stepped into my parents' house for the last time. The living room was filled with the familiar scent of pine and cinnamon, the tree glowing softly in the corner, and relatives scattered across sofas and chairs exchanging quiet greetings. Mom had set out platters of cookies and coffee. Dad stood near the fireplace talking to an uncle, and Courtney lingered by the window scrolling her phone. Everyone smiled when I walked in, but the smiles were tight, uncertain, as if they sensed something off, but could not place it. I set my coat down and moved to the center of the room, the same spot where we had opened presents every year since I was a child. The air felt thick, charged with the unspoken tension that had been building for weeks. I looked directly at my father and asked calmly, "Who did you sell the house to?" The room went still. Forks paused midair. Conversations died. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Dad's face drained of color. Courtney stared at me like she had been slapped. I let the silence stretch for a moment, then let out a soft laugh, not mocking, just the release of something long held in. "What's so funny?" Dad finally managed, his voice rough. I met his eyes. "Because the house you just sold actually belongs to me. 100%. There was no valid power of attorney. The deed was forged, and under North Carolina law that makes the entire transfer void from the start." The words landed like stones in water. Ripples spread across the room. An aunt whispered to her husband, A cousin shifted uncomfortably. Mom whispered what, as if the sentence did not compute. Dad tried to speak, but nothing came out at first. When he did, it was weak. We thought it was for the family. I shook my head slowly. It was never yours to sell. The signature was faked. The power of attorney was fraudulent. I checked the public records myself. The buyers, Aaron Mercer and Bradley Mercer, are innocent. They will be protected by their title insurance and reimbursed in full. But you, Dad, face civil liability for the fraud and, if the district attorney pursues it, possible criminal charges for forgery. The broker Logan Pierce could lose his license. Everything you did is on record now. The room erupted in murmurs. Relatives exchanged glances, some shocked, some already piecing together the overdue notices they had heard about in hushed conversations. Mom started crying quietly, not the dramatic sobs she used before, but something smaller, broken. Courtney looked at the floor, face burning. Dad sat down heavily on the arm of the sofa, staring at nothing. The party dissolved around us. People made excuses to leave early, hugging awkwardly, whispering sympathies or questions. No one knew what to say to me. They knew the story would spread through the neighborhood, through family group chats, through holiday dinners for years to come. The consequences followed quickly. The mortgage on my parents' house, already overdue for months without my support, moved into formal delinquency. Foreclosure notices arrived in the mail within weeks, giving them a narrow window to catch up or lose the home they had lived in for decades. Courtney's debt continued to grow, with late fees and interest, her credit score plummeting further. They could no longer rely on me to absorb the damage. The money from the attempted sale never materialized for them, and the legal cloud over the fraud meant no quick fixes. My father faced the real possibility of court dates, fines, and a criminal record that would follow him the rest of his life. The family's reputation in Raleigh, built partly on the image of a successful daughter who took care of everyone, shattered in one morning. I stayed only long enough to say what needed to be said. There was no yelling, no tears from me, no final dramatic exit. I simply gathered my coat, looked at each of them one last time, and walked out the door. The cold air felt clean against my skin. I drove home without looking back. In the days that followed, I blocked their numbers, deleted the group chats, and turned off notifications from anyone connected to them. The silence was not empty. It was peaceful. I returned to my business with focus I had not felt in years. New product launches, team meetings, late nights that now belonged entirely to me. I started therapy, rebuilt routines around exercise and sleep, and began planning trips just for myself. The house I had bought, the one they tried to take, remained mine, a quiet reminder that what I had earned could not be claimed by anyone else. The lesson here is simple but hard-earned: love without respect is not love, it is obligation dressed up as family. Giving endlessly does not guarantee appreciation, it often breeds expectation. Boundaries are not selfish, they are survival. When you stop funding someone else's life at the expense of your own, you reclaim not just money, but dignity, peace, and the right to decide your future. To everyone who has listened all the way to the end of this story, thank you. Your time and attention mean more than you know. Stories like this are not rare, and sharing them reminds us we are not alone. If this resonated with you, if you have ever felt trapped by similar expectations, please share your thoughts in the comments below. I read everyone, and your experiences help others see they are not the only ones walking this path.